We do have a special guest today, and it's an old friend of mine and an old friend to wood turning, David Ellsworth, and I'm going to spotlight him in a minute. Uh,
Oh, wow.
David holds membership card number 1 in the AAW, and was along with Ernie, was one of the founding members. So we have 2 founding members of the AAW on screen today. I met David back in the late 70s when I was editor of Fine Woodworking magazine, and he was blowing us all away with making these. This is on the bottom, Ellsworth, 878, California cherry. So I think that's probably an early piece. And David has gone on, of course, to teach us all how to do hollow turning in a way that nobody ever saw before, and how to be a craftsman and a teacher and an artist and a gentleman all in one go. So, without further than that, David, would you like to just say, I'm going to spotlight you. You want to just introduce yourself a little bit and tell us a little bit what you're working on right now?
Sure. Thanks, John. Very kind of you, of course. In the background, I'm lounging in a gallery. When Wendy and I came down from Pennsylvania to North Carolina 4 years ago, we found this house that had this enormous basement in it, and I realized immediately that I wasn't going to have to build another building to have my wood turning school. I could do it in the basement. And also, along with that, I got a space that was carpeted and about 25 by 30 that for a gallery for Wendy's work and my work. I thought what I would do to start out this morning is, you have to excuse me, I've got a bit of a head cold. I've been visiting grandchildren for the last 5 days. I thought I would start out with just a little historical reference to my own work. And in order to do that, I get to move.
We may lose you as you move around, but you'll be back. You might freeze.
I think it works pretty well down here, actually.
Good.
Yeah, can you see that okay?
Yeah.
All right. What I wanted to do was to start out, let me make sure with this piece right here, which is actually a laminate, but it's significant in the fact that it was made in June of 1976 and was the first successful piece that I did with bent tools. And I say that because the rest of them didn't make it. And I was experimenting, of course, and trying to gain a consistent wall thickness of about 1/4 of an inch. But I thought it was fun to look back at objects like this, and that led to objects like this, which were, as soon as we get a handle on something, I got to check to make sure you're seeing what I want you to see. As soon as we get a handle on something that we like, we start making bigger and bigger pieces. And I'll show you some bigger pieces in a moment. But what I did was to shrink the scale of the opening in proportion to the piece itself, for the simple reason that it was possible to do that with the tools that I had. That's lignin vitae.
What was your blowout rate at that time? How many would you lose?
I'm thinking I was probably in the earliest stages knocking down about half of them were blowing up, and these were all exotic materials, because in Colorado you couldn't turn ponderosa pine or aspen trees because nobody would buy the things. So I was buying dimensional lumber from a friend of mine in Boulder, and finally got to a point with this piece right here, which has no foot to it in the classical sense. It's just a continuous arcing surface. And that's Brazilian rosewood, and that's about 9 inches in diameter at 1/16 of an inch thick. And that's 1977. So it came fast once it finally came to me. But what really came to me was this piece here, which is actually black walnut burl, but it's the sapwood of the burl. And what's significant about that is that it didn't take very long to turn it because the shavings were blown out all over the place, of course. But I was in a garage at the time, and I managed to turn it off, and I set it up on the shelf. And the next morning I got up and it was no longer on the shelf, and I just assumed that it was the mouses that got it that night. But the point being is that it distorted. And I took that lead and really blew it to a greater proportion in other pieces. I learned to love green wood. And the reason is that it talks back to you. Dry wood, once you shape it, you know what you're going to get right away. And it's kind of like color photography, but green wood is more like black and white photography in that you're not necessarily sure what's going to happen with it as it begins to distort. Now, I think most of us are familiar with Madrona out in Oregon and Washington and the amount of distortion that occurs. But I don't know that many have seen a fresh cut black walnut pearl that doesn't look like black walnut. But at any rate, I learned at that point a terrific lesson, and that is learn to understand your material as you're working with it in order to be able to explore future directions in the work that you might like to do. And when that occurred,
David, before you got to this in your turning, did you have a time when you made salad bowls and rolling pins and stuff?
No. What I made was salt and pepper and sugar shaker sets. They were my production item because all the potters told me it's nice to be able to do one-of-a-kind objects, but you can't make a living at it. So, because nobody can afford it, even if you do price them accurately. And so I made salt and pepper and sugar shaker sets. In fact, I've got one right up here. And I did about 5,000 of these things in 2.5 years. And the salt and peppers, can you see this okay? Because it's up on a taller shelf.
We can, yeah.
Okay. And it had cork bottoms, and it was a laminate of Paduke and walnut to give me the height that I needed, because I could only get 8/4 stock. And then this one here is the sugar shakers part that has the pouring spout on the front, and it has a dovetail slide in the bottom, right here where you fill it. And the set of 3 of those I sold in the craft shows in Colorado and Wyoming for $18 for the 3 of them. and was damn glad to get that amount, believe me. That and hand-carved hummingbirds. I made hand-carved hummingbirds too out of exotic woods, and I do the craft shows and dangle them in mobiles above my booth, and et cetera, et cetera. But it's a good point, because if you're trying to make a living at what you're doing, you have to figure out what your clientele wants, something that is unique and interesting and something that you can make like any production turner could do or would do in order to be able to survive. But then as I back off from this individual piece to the wall itself, the kinds of things that I have done in scale are pretty sizable stuff. This one here is sugar maple burl from New Hampshire, and that's 20 inches in diameter.
Now, are these pieces you've kept for yourself, or are they ones that have a price tag on them and haven't sold yet?
It's a combination of the two, John. And what I have done throughout my years of working is save the best pieces for myself out of a burl, for instance, or a group of materials, and knowing that someday down the road they're going to have a value that's different than the current value that I placed on them. But I moved from working with burls and that type of objects to working with paint and with fire, so that I could burn. And I turned a lot of ash, like your friend spoke this morning. And because it's such a unique material and it's so versatile, that it picks up a texture when you're working with it, and as it dries, and of course when you burn it, it's burning out the soft fibers of the grain, and you get a wonderful texture on it. But I found this metallic fabric paint, and boy, it was very exciting, and I did a whole batch of these pieces over a couple of years period of time. And the biggest one was 20 inches in diameter as a sphere. They were all spherical forms.
How long would that have taken you to turn? 20 inches?
20 inches, probably about 6 hours.
And a lot of that is picking shavings out.
Yeah, most of that is blowing the shavings out and digging them out with a scooped little bent over 1/4-inch brass rod.
Now, are you using any kind of a laser hoo-ha to know where your cutter is, or are you working by feel?
I couldn't even spell laser in those days. I just do it by feel, and I use a bent wire caliper that I make up. In fact, if you go back to your old days of fine woodworking in 1979, I think it's the May-June issue, the first article that I did on hollow turning that John edited for me. And there's a picture of the caliper that I use it's just a wire, 29 inches long and 3/16 in diameter, and it's bent in an odd way so that I can measure the wall thickness in the upper region and then in the center region, and then flip it upside down and I can measure in the bottom region. Costs about $2, and it's literally something that I use on every hollow form that I've ever made, because it assures me that the sound that I get from cutting is accurate to the
Your mic just cut out. Where are you?
Oh, sorry.
There you go. Okay.
Is accurate to the actual wall thickness that I have.
So how do you keep from going through? Are you paying attention to sound, or how do you know when you're almost going to bust through when you're inside?
Yeah, well, you do pay attention to sound, because each species and each wall thickness has its own characteristic sound to it. And there's a lot of overlap in that as well. But anyone that's turned a thin object understands the nature of sound. And I'm getting better at it because I just got hearing aids. So I'm learning that technique as well.
David, could you show us that tool?
Yes. Let me set this down so I won't get you guys dizzy, and I'll go grab one real quick.
When he comes back, at some point, we'll go to gallery view and go to general questions as well. You guys okay with this?
Yeah, that's great.
Yep.
That Art Magazine article that David mentioned from, I guess, 78 or 79 also had a picture of Ellsworth wearing overalls with no shirt, straddling the lathe like a pony, wailing away on a piece of wood. It was a lot of people were kind of alarmed by that picture.
John, I've got the article here, but I don't know whether it will be okay when I show it in the camera.
Sure. Oh, there's the tool. David's back. We'll come around to you on that, Kai.
Can you see
Okay.
that? Can you see that?
Talking about.
Yes,
We
very
see
well.
it.
Okay. So you notice that the tips are offset. They don't come together like a normal caliper. Well, I guess that makes it an abnormal caliper. But the point being is that I work with it as a reference tool. So if I think I have a 1/4-inch wall, I'll set that gap to 3/8. And when I put it inside the form and scoot it around in different locations, if I do have a 1/4-inch wall, it'll give me an 1/8-inch reading on the outside from the tip to the surface of the wood. And It's when you get thinner than that, down in a 16th, which is pretty thin. At least I thought it was thin until I got a hold of one of James Prestini's plates last month, and it's a 16th of an inch in thickness, but it's also 12 inches in diameter.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable. And some guy up in New Hampshire that acquires some of my work on occasion got a hold of 5 of his plates through a collector in North Carolina and offered me one of them, which I was eternally grateful for, because when we moved down here, we had enough space to be able, in the upper part of the house, to build shelves and display our collection so that when students come, they can see Stocksdale bowls and handle them, and Lindquist bowls and Giles Gilson's bowls and another 150 or so pieces up there. It's really a wonderful opportunity to give people a history lesson in 3 dimensions. And
Well, what do you want to show us before we go to a gallery view and see everybody's face and ask you questions? We still got you on Spotlight. You got some more stuff there in the gallery that that you'd like to talk about, or you're willing to talk about?
yeah, sure. These are the what I call spirit forms. I was a really close friend with Paul Solner, the ceramist in Colorado, and one of the pieces of advice that he gave me was never underestimate the power of small objects. So I looked around and I was seeing Del Stubbs make tiny pieces that were really well designed and obviously well made. But I was also seeing a lot of other people's work that is just tiny, but they were terrible designs. So I decided I would minimize the scale of the work that I was doing and knock them down to, well, this one over here is a 1/2 inch in diameter. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, yep. That's hickory burl. And I learned very quickly that you can't sell very easily one piece at a time. You've got to have comparison. So I made them in sets of 3, and that made it more viable. And I can put it in a gallery, and people love them because they're getting a piece of an artist, but they don't have to spend a fortune doing it, and they like the scale of them. And I've always thought about, in relation to scale, that an object that's small, is only really successful if you can blow it up photographically and make it large and have it still hang together as a good design. And even these pieces that imitated the ones that I made when I was younger.
How big are those, David?
That one's 5 inches in diameter.
And what kind of retailers would be on these pieces if you were making them today, or are you making them today?
Oh, I am making them today. And they run, well, I don't want to embarrass anybody, but they run any place from these little guys from about $150 up to about $1,200, depending on the scale of the piece and the nature of the material. But it's a wonderful discipline, number one, a design discipline, to be able to work at this scale. And I'm still using my big gouge, except at the bottom. When I reverse it and put it into a vacuum chuck, then I use the big gouge again. But the tools that I work internally are screwdrivers and Allen wrenches primarily. There's also a bunch of them are made out of Irish concrete nails, which may seem odd, but they're long and they're strong and they're skinny. And so you've got enough nail to put into a handle and still have a good report from the front. So at any rate, if I scan out here to this side of the room, you can see a variety of different pieces over here. And to reflect back on your comment about saving pieces of your own work, I firmly believe in recording one's own history, because it's not likely that anybody's going to do it for you. And still, at the same time, I think it's important to make these objects available to people if they're taking the time to come down here to North Carolina to look at them, either here or in Momentum Gallery in downtown North Carolina, Asheville, which is the gallery that I work with. It's a sculpture and painting multimedia gallery that's one of the few left in the country. And they handle these works also. So this one here is 26 inches in diameter. That's redwood lace burl with natural edged openings and all sorts of crazy things going on with it.
How do you work together like that when it's on the lathe? Doesn't it want to just come apart?
No, it doesn't. It's interesting that at different, there's a fairly broad range of RPMs that one can work at, where the tiny tip, and this is a 3/16 inch tip for the final cutting of the interior, just glazes right off of one edge and enters into the other, and you're going at an RPM that's probably around 900 to 1100, and it doesn't know the difference. It just cruises right across and enters into it. It's really beautiful in the way that it cuts a very clean entrance edge on the oncoming part of the hole as it's spinning around.
Well, wait a minute now. If that's 22 inches and you're running that at 900, or I can't even imagine what the rim speed of that is in miles per hour, but that's or feet per minute.
It's cooking. The lathe was 4,000 pounds. It would handle, what was it, 39 inches in diameter and 5 feet long in one piece. In fact, I did this piece here on that lathe out of redwood also.
Now, what kind of lathe is that?
It was made by Jim Thompson out of Greenville, South Carolina.
And how did you hollow this thing? This is what, 4 feet, 5 feet tall?
It's 53 inches, whatever, a little over 4 feet.
And did you hollow that down from the opening, or you got a false bottom in there?
No, I turned it like a cylinder on the horizontal, and I went between spur and drive, spur center and tailstock ball bearing center, live center, and I went up from the bottom to about 2/3 into the form at a 1/4 inch wall thickness, leaving a stem in the middle. And then I reversed its direction, put that stem on a faceplate, threaded it back onto the spindle, and then came down from the top and met it at the junction of the two, of the bottom to the top. And then I incorporated a close friend of mine named Matt Babiars, who was a student and really a great kid. And he came over one day and I said, just put your hands and arms underneath this piece when I make this last cut. And I poked through, and this probably about a 32nd of an inch of solid wood there, and separated the entire piece from the shaft down the center. And it dropped into his hands, his arms. And then we turned the lathe off, and off it came. It was really exciting.
Now, is that so? The bottom of that is open, is that right?
Completely open, yes.
So you didn't try and plug it to make it look like it was a vessel?
No, I tried to learn very early not to force things into making them to look like something that they are not. So yeah, it is a hollow form, is best description I can give to you. And it weighs about 8 pounds. I don't know what it started out at, probably around 350, somewhere in that range. Wow. But it was a great exercise, and I just really enjoyed the movement of the material and the movement of the operator, in this case myself, or watching someone else do a really good job at what they're doing. Because craft is about movement in many of its different forms. And when you engage your body and get involved in it to the point where you're really absorbed by the process, then you suddenly realize that of all the things that do come off the lathe, the most valuable thing that you take away from it is the process of doing it. And that involves movement. And then I got to a point after we moved down here. Well, that's not true. It was about the year before we moved down here, where I had been working in a smaller scale, and I wanted to go and become more linear with my work. And I knew at this point, it would have been about, I'm probably 71, 72 years old, that I didn't have the physicality to be able to do pieces like this, because this was the tool that I used inside of this was a bar that was 1.5 inches in diameter and 8 feet long. And the back end of it, I put a sleeve bearing over that and laid that on top of a shelf so to take the weight. And of course, the front was on a tool rest. And that allowed me to move the piece around or the tool around in order to cut into different locations.
Well, that bar must have weighed 100 pounds.
No, I don't think so. I think probably about 35 or 40, somewhere in that range. But it on the end of it, I had one hole that came in at a 45-degree angle to the end of the bar, and that held a 1/4 inch square cutting tip, and then a 3/16 inch cutting tip, and then the main hole in the end of the bar that shared the Allen screw with the 45-degree hole was for the 1/4 inch tip that I did the boring going down inside. It was very exciting. At any rate, I wanted to get more linear with my work, so I came up with a whole series like this that I called an Emergence Series. And let's see if I can hold this a little steadier here.
These are bandsaw pieces, are they not?
Bandsaw pieces, that's right. There's no lathe involved in it whatsoever. I cut the outside, and then I go in and make an entrance cut about a 1/4 of an inch deep, and then I turn 90 degrees and go around and cut the largest of the circles out first. And then I go into another spot and cut another circle and another spot and another circle, and I wind my way around. And so it's like an accordion in effect. And it's freehand. It's really fun. And then I join the area where the band went in a variety of different ways. Sometimes it's a sloped surface that I just marry back together again. And then I introduced the paint once again.
Now, what bandsaw and what blade are you using for this?
Well, I'm working with a Powermatic 5 horsepower 18-inch bandsaw, and I get my bands from a company in Florida called bandsawblades.com. Is right. They are good, man. And you can talk with them about what you were doing, and they'll match what kind of band you want to the job that you've got.
We have a little saw shop up here in Ephrata that does an enormously good job with sharpening and bandsaw blades as well. A lot of us go there for get custom blades in 3 TPI and things like that.
Yeah, right. And they send them out that night once you order them. They're incredible, and they're not expensive. Bandsawblades.com.
I'll send it in the chat in the follow-up chat. What's the piece to the right of that? Okay,
that's an older piece, probably from the early '80s. After we moved
Tip the phone a little more so we can see it all.
What's that?
Tip the phone a little more. We can't quite see it.
Okay, hold on.
There you go.
Oh, I see. All right. I got to look around the corner here to get it right.
Yeah, no, it's technology.
Yeah. And that's, again, a hollow piece. Same method that I used with the big redwood piece, where I come in from the bottom of the form to begin with and leave a post in the middle and then come in from the top and match it. You've got to match your wall thickness accurately, though. That's where my wire caliper has become a lifesaver.
So you're working beside the center pole that's holding it all together between centers.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that centerpiece has to be very carefully made so that it doesn't break away at some point. And oftentimes, although it didn't happen after I realized what the problem was, I went too narrow and encountered a bark inclusion, and then the center post broke away under the pressure from the tailstock to the spur drive.
Sure.
So, but this was a group of pieces that I really couldn't do hollow forms in my conventional manner, but I wanted to take advantage of the natural edge. So I did on both top and bottom. So I did a variety of different shapes like this, with some sections like this obviously has sections in the bottom that is cut, but other sections in the foreground you can see where it has achieved a natural edge. And then
Current work. What are you currently making?
I'm currently making pieces out of some really exotic materials. Afzelia, Afzelia. It's an Asian wood. Let me come over here and see if I can, which I'm trying to get in larger quantity. These little 3 pieces on the right, let me see if I can get this.
There they are.
There they are Afzelia, and boy, has it got some figure in it. It is really extraordinary material. And I got a connection to a guy in California who goes to these different countries and negotiates these things. It's more expensive than it should be, so the price goes up, but it's really beautiful material. And so at the moment I'm working in that. And here's another piece right there next to a piece of cocobolo burl and a piece of pink ivory and a piece of Florida, what do they call that stuff?
And I think maybe people might like to ask you questions. Who's got a question for David?
Before asking a question, John,
Yeah.
could I just acknowledge to both David and Ernie that I'm really thankful for you guys that are the trailblazers of our craft and the work you've done over the years to make it a much better marketplace for the rest of us. And it's just wonderful to see the work you're doing, and it's great to see David, that you're still at it and still enthralled in wood turning as much as anything else. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I've had such a great time mentoring other people and allowing them to follow up and go out and create their own careers, because one of the more difficult parts about being involved in a field is that it's not a field until there are a huge number of people involved in it. So you can get some perspective on what you're doing in relation to what other people are doing, and you give opportunities for other people to do things that you can't do, as we have seen in our field through the journal and other friendships. But boy, I'll tell you, without those friendships, you'd feel pretty lonely.
Well, I'm surprised to hear you be so eloquent about relating with the wood itself and the figure in the wood and the Afzelia and stuff like that. Can you talk to that some more? I mean, it seems to me you've maintained that almost religious fascination with the wood for your whole career.
Yes, I have, and I've done that for obvious reasons. I started out when I was a kid working with ponderosa pine, which my dad used to build the cabin in Colorado with, and the odor of sugar maple burl and all the things that I was exposed to, and then getting involved with other people like Mark Lindquist, who was working so much in sugar maple burl, and changing different styles in relation to the material. But when I go to the lathe with a piece of wood, I have a basic idea of what I want to do without question, whether it's a hollow form or whatever it might be. But I don't have a, quote, design in mind.
So you don't make a drawing first. I mean, I've seen you draw.
I do not. I use the gouge as my pen, and I'm forming the piece as I work with it. And because you need to have some kind of response from your material. Otherwise, if you're doing one-of-a-kind pieces, if it's production work, that's a very different approach, because you do need a drawing and you need to replace things that get broken. But when you're doing one-of-a-kind work, you want to be as free as you possibly can to make decisions that are intelligent to the material that you're working with, because the material can change from one side of a burl to another side of a burl, and that will heavily affect the outcome of the forms that you're dealing with. And with that in mind, what I do, especially with students, is instead of talking about design when they bring a piece of wood to the lathe, we talk about developing a piece. And what that does is it takes the pressure off the student who doesn't, or probably doesn't, have a lot of experience in the arts, to get rid of the baggage that the word design oftentimes lays on people. And it's a tough one to get past because you don't have the tools, and either the physical tools or the mental tools to work with the concept of design when you're starting out. So it's exciting to watch by demonstration and then by observation how a student works with a material. If they get to a point where they're uncertain about what they're actually doing, you can walk over and say, well, what would you like to do? What is the material doing talking to you? Well, I hadn't thought about it that way, but it's important.
How much teaching do you do now?
Well, I generally, obviously, with the COVID, I've had to cut back for the last year and a half. But I have set up dates now from late August up until January, or through January of 22. And I drew on my waiting list for people who were inquiring as to whether I'm going to be teaching again. And I'm currently full up now through January.
How many people at a time, and how long do they come for, and all that?
I take 5 people maximum, and they come for a 3-day period of intensive work. And we used to serve 3 meals a day in our house, but we're only doing 1 meal now, the luncheon meal, so that they can get their breakfast and their dinners elsewhere. And part of the reason, oddly enough, is that today there are so many different diets out there that we just can't keep track of everything. And when they come we figure it's much smarter to do it that way, and I can cut down on the lab fee, which was $100 a weekend, and taking it down to $75 to help them pay for raw materials when they go out to a restaurant for breakfast or dinner. So it's really fun. And I've got 5 robust lathes here to entertain people, and we just kick ass and take names. And it's really a hoot.
So you do this every weekend?
No, we do it. Well, this coming year, it's twice a month.
So you might have 24 classes in a year.
Yeah, about.
That's a lot, David.
It's a lot of work, but on the other hand, I'm only 76. Hey, I got a lot of time yet to go.
David, I have a question for you.
Sure.
What does the wood tell you that flies apart while you're working with it?
Well, probably you're being too aggressive. Secondly, you're presenting too much of the edge of the tool to the material. And if it were a case of a gouge, it would be too much edge that's not yet supported by the bevel. Now, interestingly enough, there's a cut that I use on a natural edge bowl and a cut-rimmed bowl to do the interior. It's the final cut before sanding. So, of course, I call it a finishing cut. And that cut starts out on the bevel, but it's on the left-hand side of the edge, but it's only near the tip. And the design of the gouge that I have is set up in such a way that with the tool horizontal, the shaft is horizontal, and the line across the top of the flute is horizontal. If you touch the bevel to the wood, you can only get about a 1/16th, possibly an 1/8 of an inch of edge to touch the wood, and that's what you want. Because at that spot, to the left of center, of the center point of the edge, you have the wood coming straight down and the edge pointing straight up, and you can't get a better quality cut than that. But the beauty of it is that if you if you maintain that position all the way through the cut from the rim down to the center of the bottom, you can do it on a cut rim, or on a natural edge bowl, because it won't snag on you. But if you do it on a cut rim bowl, you have to start out in the roughing position so that the flute would be pointed 45 degrees to the right. The reason for that is that you've got to get the bevel on the wood first, then bring it to the horizontal, and then go ahead with the cut. So the exciting part about that is that you can get a terrific surface out of that, working with that type of cut. And one of the guys that came to me and he said, one of the club members reported to him that they were calling it the Ellsworth Suicide Cut, which I was thrilled at. Somebody else blows up pieces too. And of course, what they're doing is when they start making the cut, they over-rotate the handle, and that lifts the edge off the wood. So what do? They rotate the gouge to the left counterclockwise, and that engages the long side of the edge of the tool, and that's when it blows the piece up. So you have to come back to the safe spot, get on the bevel, and start the cut again. So it works. It's exciting. What's that?
Did that help you out, Jim?
Well, I was thinking whether the wood was telling him, I do not want to be turned, but it sounds like it's the turner's fault if it blows up.
Well, it's not necessarily the wood's fault, although it's possible there's a fracture in the material at some point, which is, and you'll hear that if you have a little tick going on in there. But so it's worthwhile, certainly, of checking the material out.
Now, do you glue stuff up if it's cracked, or do you discard it or live with a crack?
I do not. I discard it.
You don't glue it?
What's that?
You do not glue it? I
do not glue it, no. And I don't glue bark back on when it flies off either. It's a futile process, actually. If you glue bark back on a natural edge, it may last for a while, but super glue is non-longevic lifestyle or lifetime, and it'll come off later. Or someone will pick it up and put their thumb over the bark, and it'll snap the bark off because it's a different animal than the sapwood underneath it, and it's separated by Mother Nature's, a cambium layer, and that's the problem. So you have to treat it a little differently, but it's exciting. Try, if possible, the usual thing, try if possible to cut your materials in the winter time when the sap is not running to do your natural edge bark on bowls, because that's the only way you're going to save the bark down the road.
Anybody? Okay, let's have more questions for David. I know that Kai has, in fact, got that old magazine article. Have you got it there, Kai?
Yes, I have. Actually, it was in a collection called Fine Woodworking on Faceplate Turning.
I happen to have edited that decades ago.
Okay, and it's from 1987. And I just took 3 photos from the article because that's better than looking at the original article. and maybe I can try to share them.
Go for it.
Is that the one you were talking about, John?
Talking about. Now, wasn't there a picture of David straddling the lathe like it was a horse as well in there?
Yes. Let me see. This one.
That's the one.
There it is. Now, that 87 refers to the publication of that particular book. The original article came out in 79.
79.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, it's a collection of articles, so it must be later. Yeah.
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 At least he's wearing a face mask.
Well, that's a good point.
Well, go for it. Do you always wear a face mask?
I always wear a face mask. Absolutely.
You ever been hit?
I have been hit. Absolutely. Everybody's been hit. And if you haven't, you will. And the hardest part of all is going to a demonstration and they don't provide a face shield for you. And a piece of bark flies off and hits you in your glasses or on your forehead or something. But I have a lot of testimonials from my students who say, thank you very much. I didn't wear my face shield before I came to your class, and I got home and I got whacked, and now I wear it every day.
David, how are you equipped for this kind of thing? Are you going to teach video or make videos or do the kinds of things we're doing here? What do you do?
Well, I have a setup here where I'm doing RIDs,
interactive live remote demos.
Yes, thank you. I can never remember what it is that I do, but I'm trying to do as best I can. And I've done about a dozen of them so far, and they're fine. I don't get good questions like I'm getting today from you all, but that's because we're generally focused on technique more than content. But I started that with Alan Zenreich's help last fall, and it's an abstract process, I must admit, because when you're used to demonstrating with people in front of you, you get responses like I'm getting today, but also facial expressions change when you mention different kinds of things. And it's important for me as a teacher to be able to respond to that in order to know what direction to go with the content of what I'm talking about. I mean, it may be interesting to me, but it may not be interesting to other people. Or I may have missed something along the way and somebody's afraid to say anything and cut in.
What we've tried to establish here, and we started this group just to show our members how to use Zoom, but what we really soon on realized is this is not TV. If you want to play it like TV and just watch, you can, but the most fun is to be had by getting engaged and involved and, holding stuff up and asking questions. And
right.
We try and keep up with that with the spotlights and how we manage the screen, but it's a struggle.
Yeah, and at the very outset, I was a little uncertain as to whether or not I wanted to continue it. And then people were telling me, yeah, but you're reaching people that never have an opportunity to go to a conference. They never have an opportunity to go to a workshop or anything like that, or it's too much money, or it's too far to walk, or whatever it might be. And I honor that. I appreciate that.
We similarly here, we now have people, we started from the Lancaster Club, but we have people from, I don't know, probably 8-10 states and overseas. Kai is in Germany. We often have guys from England and once in a while Australia come into this call.
Yeah.
Questions for David?
I want to ask about design, not design. I even hate that word. How do you educate your muse or whatever, so when you approach a piece of wood, you have a sense about what it should be?
That's a good question, and it's a hard one to answer because it does involve the work that you have done in that species and in other species that precedes the work that you're about ready to do. You get clues from other material. I just spent an enormous amount of money, $400, on a burl that was only 9 inches in diameter. It was a hickory burl from a guy I'd never worked with before. And when it arrived, I was going, gee, I was a little intimidated as to where I wanted to start on this thing. But when I got done with it, I suddenly realized the value is not in the dollars. It's in the expression that came out from the surface of that burl, hickory burl, in relation to the combination of sapwood and bark, and how it laid itself out, and how little work I had to do to come up with a really interesting form. And I knew from working with hickory burl in the past, green stuff, that it was going to distort almost like madrona. But if you've ever turned hickory, you also know another thing, and that is that it's really dense. So if you're going through a small opening, you have to take your time with a variety of different tools, because the smaller the opening, the smaller the diameter of the shaft of the tool can be, and the longer it has to be to get to the bottom of that form. And that's really awkward. So it was one of those cases where I managed to pull off a 1/2 inch diameter opening at the top of it at 9 inches in diameter, finished. And I got a lot of banging around inside, but that's again a lesson to me to learn how to, I use in my book the concept of shaking hands with the wood when you go in with a tool.
Don't you have a ceramics education? And what about looking at pieces of museums?
I did. I threw pots for 1.5 years as an undergraduate.
Does that inform wood turning?
No, that was during.
I mean, does it help? Does it help? Because how is that background helpful?
Oh, what's helpful is you understand the relationship of you as a operating individual in relation to the material itself, and how to squeeze the clay, and what pace that you take through it in order to make it work properly for you so it doesn't just fall. And it's like working with any material. If you're starting to learn how to weld, you mess it up every time. And you're working with clay and wood turning, you're going to do that as well. You have to get past that process, or through that process, and get past that stage.
Do you look at museum?
John, sorry, go ahead.
Did you study museum work as well? I mean, when you're working on forms and ideas, do you look at?
I did not. I grew up in the Southwest in Colorado, and New Mexico was our playground, and I was heavily involved in working with Native American pots. My parents had some. They had also a bunch of rugs, but I looked at Maria pots and blue corn pots from the time I was an infant all the way up to today. In fact, I just saw one the other day at the museum here in Asheville when I was there last weekend. It was a Maria pot that it was a good 18 inches in diameter. It was huge. And for a ceramic pot of that era, meaning the late early 1900s, to be that beautifully made and that scale was just unbelievable. Well, you can't do that if you don't understand your material. So learning about wood is a wonderful way to be able to develop forms that you might otherwise not have considered making, just because you have a greater understanding of the material as you work more with it.
David, I've just got a sort of a comment and a half question. For me, I compare pottery with wood turning by saying that potters create design, and we reveal the pattern within the wood as opposed to create. So the privilege of wood turning is to be the first to see the nature's true beauty. When you get a piece of wood, do you? I sometimes put the burls or pieces aside and just simply study them for a while before I even put them on the lathe, because there's so many different angles you can see. It almost feels like it's an inspiration question. What's your comment on that sort of thing?
Sure, and the method that I work with is I take the obvious. If there's a recess in the surface, then I know I'm going to have a hole in the form. But put it between centers and convince yourself that it's okay to manipulate the object as you trim away or nibble, is the term I use, nibble at the surface until you start getting rid of the things that you know you don't want. And then eventually you'll sneak up on the shape that's left over inside the excess material that you're removing. And that will give you the clue as to how you want to refine that shape. And then use a backwards slicing cut to refine the shape and true it up. But your initial exposure of the tool to the wood is with a roughing cut to get rid of the stuff. But you use the tip of the tool so that you can nibble at the material and not over aggressively work it down to something that pleases you. But I absolutely agree with the concept of studying it. It's just that the next phase in that is to get something going, get started. And it's and your spur and your drive center and your tailstock center are ideal tools to be able to alter the position from your original idea to something new as you learn more from the material that you're working from.
So you change the center. You'll undo the tailstock, rotate it a bit, tighten it up again?
Absolutely.
How many times might you do that in a piece?
What's that?
How many times in a piece might you do that?
It totally depends on how accurate I was from the very outset putting it on. And if you're doing a natural edge bowl, it's really nice to practice with those because you can adjust the height of the wings by using repositioning the tool in the tailstock. The spur center, the spur drive in the front portion is pretty given because you're dealing with a certain amount of diameter on both axes. But the tailstock point is fun to position it in different locations in the live center in order to be able to get different effects out of the top of the natural edge. Mm. Putting it another way, you can adjust the height of the two wings of a natural edge bowl, but that doesn't, if you get at the same height, but that doesn't mean it's going to be a better bowl. It just means that you're in control of that movement at the top, which leads to the other obvious question, and that is, that hasn't been asked, and that is, what proportion do you use for designing the foot or developing the foot in relation to the height or the diameter? I don't use any of that. I just go with what my eye tells me. Because if I get locked into a proportion, it's going to be somebody else's numbers, not mine. And I want to be free to be able, even with kind of quasi-functional natural edge bowls, I want to be able to manipulate that thing until I get it so it pleases me that day, because I know the next day it's going to be a little bit different. Now, if you're doing production work, sure, you need to, as I said earlier, you need to have a formula in order to be able to replace a bowl that got busted from a set you made 20 years ago. That's fine. But not with one-of-a-kind objects. You take a great deal of chance when you work with natural edge forms in one-of-a-kind pieces. But the beauty of that is that it teaches you how to fail.
And on that note, kids, it's 11 o'clock, so we're at the end of the hour. We'll let David release David from the obligation to keep talking. But on the other hand, anybody who'd like to stay on screen and yak some more is totally welcome to do so. Thank you very much, David. This was a terrific hour.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, thank you, David.
Glad to be part of it.
It's good to see you once again, David.
Thank you. Hi, Ernie. You too. I didn't recognize you on that screen a little bit ago.
Ernie's a regular on this show.
Well, that's good.
So, yeah, I was interested in, I believe in George Nakashima's idea that every piece of wood has some ultimate form it can be made into.
Sure.
But I'm not sure Nakashima saw anything spiritual in it, nor do I. But do you see something spiritual in it?
I do. Because I come at it from that perspective.
Well, what do you mean spiritual? Do you mean, what's that mean to you?
I want to get something back. But if I'm going to, from the pieces that I'm working on, but in order to get something back, I got to put something into it. And if I don't put something into it, I get halfway through and I realize this is a dead piece. It's going nowhere. And I want to back up or start over or pitch it and get into something that's more exciting, more challenging, and more worthwhile of my time to invest in this object. Do that by learning how to ask the right questions. And that interestingly gets into that concept of failure that I mentioned earlier. And that is, if you don't learn how to fail, you will depress yourself every time you do, meaning blowing up a piece. But once you accept the inevitable, that accidents are going to happen, you become more tuned into your body and how it's moving through the different cuts. You become more tuned to the sound that's being produced from the material as you're cutting it. And you can actually, if you demonstrate for a relative or friends or something on your own time, talk to yourself about it. Talk to them with the material. Let them ask the questions. You can ask the questions of them. Are you hearing what I'm hearing? Can you hear the difference between this and that? And what that does is it tunes you and them into the process as well. And that's when it really becomes beautiful.
David, once I put a piece of wood on the lathe, I feel invested in it. And it intimidates me to adventure with it. I don't want to lose it. I now own it. How do you get around that? You obviously don't mind blowing them up because it's a learning experience. I still have a hard time doing that.
Change your attitude.
It's easy to say. Just change your attitude.
Come at it from a different route.
The stuff grows on trees.
Yeah. That's right. No, I understand where you're coming from. It's not an easy one. I suppose it's a combination of self-preservation, meaning coming at it from a point of view where I'm trying to make a living at it, and balanced with a skill that I know that I have developed, and I'm wondering how long I can hold on to that skill as I age. And that's why I went to the bandsaw for those great big pieces. Now, the big one you saw in the middle of the room here, that's back in 87. But I'm talking about today. I wouldn't be able to make that today. In fact, looking at some of the work that I've got, I wondered how in the hell I actually pulled that off. Because I don't, seriously.
I have a few of those myself.
Yeah, because I don't have the physicality to handle that type of cutting any longer. I mean, I'm still strong, but not that kind of strength. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, trying to define spirituality is not an easy one. It is not a religion, obviously, but it has limitations and advantages. And it's a matter of coming at it from a perspective that you're an inclusive element to the process. If you're an inclusive element to the process that you're doing, you're on the right track.
Yeah.
I have a daughter-in-law who's a abstract painter, I should say. She and I have had very serious conversations. She does not like me to say, well, I was inspired when I do photo art as an additional interest. And she says, don't come and tell me that you were inspired to get that. Art is about working at it.
Well, she's right. It takes work to become a decent artist. I'm not certain that one negates the other, but it is definitely a lot of work. It is not easy. I mean, I worked with a woman named Mary Frank in New York when I was a student, and she's a sculptress in New York City. Might not even be alive any longer. And I took drawing classes from her. And here's an interesting note that you might affect some of you, and that is, take a life drawing class. Put a naked body in front of you, put an easel in front of you with charcoal and paper and a sponge to erase things, and take a class in life drawing, because what you're learning there is to develop a line that you make with that charcoal that relates directly to you, as opposed to the person standing next to you who's drawing the same individual, the same model. Will have a different line. And what you'll learn from that line is not to watch the page, but to watch the model while you're doing the drawing. Not right away, but it does come to you. And what that does is it gives you a sense of volume to the line that you're using. And that's what Bill Luce was in a class years ago with me at Aramont, and he said, what's the key to gaining these types of shapes? And I said, think about line as volume as opposed to line as shape.
Huh.
If you're going to use line as shape as your model, that's when you want to do pepper mills and salt shakers and things like that. But if you think about line as volume, you will make a line, could be an inch long or 16 inch or whatever, and it will give you a sense of volume once you're done making that line.
Huh.
And that,
when you're in the zone, David, you're not thinking at all. I suspect you're reacting to something in your eyes. So you say thinking about these, but in fact, you get to the point where you're just flowing with it, you might say.
That's right. Yeah, a zone is a good term. It's like being a good basketball player. You get in the zone, you can't miss. The second thing that I think is important is take a class in Tai Chi, so that you understand the importance of every part of your body as it goes into the process of turning instead of adjacent to that process. And you'll suddenly discover your big toes are not only holding you from falling over, but they're also the source of the energy for your cuts that goes all the way through your body and manifests in the tip of the tool. Otherwise, you're liable to overdo your shoulders and your hands and your arms, and that's preventing you from doing line as volume.
Huh. Wow.
You've obviously spent a lot of time thinking about this.
True. And that's what your comment earlier was really important, is when you're making, you're not thinking. Because as soon as you start thinking about what you're doing, you're going to make an error.
David, you're talking about keep being aware of your body. I've learned a lot of that from you from years back. I saw you a couple times here in Lancaster and
Right.
at the AAW as well. And I know you emphasize a lot of that. Another individual that I've got a lot of that from is Stuart Batty. He emphasizes position and how to position your tool and your body and work together. And I've learned a lot from that.
Good. Then I'm not a solo entity out there. I'm so happy.
The other thing that is given here because of your vast experience is you know your tools well enough that you're not even thinking about how to use the tool. It becomes an extension of you. Some of us are still learning that because we don't have the years of experience of what that tool is as an extension of us. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. Which should be a measure of encouragement for you in that, because as you're working with a tool and you feel like it's really, really working for you, that's when you're united with it. And then you make a goof and you say, oh boy, I must have been thinking again.
Well, I think another way to learn your tools is to do a variety of different topics. I do a lot of bowls, natural edge, cut rim bowls, but I do a lot of inside out, different types of things. I see somebody doing a demonstration of an odd topic and I think, well, I'm going to try that. And I've made a variety of different things. And when you're cutting mostly air and a little bit of wood coming around on an inside out or something like that, you learn that you better have good tool control or you're going to have a real mess.
True.
So that helps me a lot.
And when people talk about tool control, it's a little bit abstract for the receiver of that conversation because they don't necessarily understand what you mean by controlling the tool. Too many people, I think, try and go in to overpower the cut by putting muscle into it. But if you sneak up onto a cut by very gracefully touching the bevel to the material, if you're using the bevel, and then easing the edge into the material, you're suddenly discovering the tool's potential as it begins to make the cut. But too many people go after the cut thinking that the edge, which obviously is going to do the work, but thinking that the edge is the primary resource for that cut, when in fact, it's the body that's the resource. And the bevel becomes the means to allow the edge to join the wood, and as I said earlier, to shake hands with the wood. You learn this basically by doing hollow turning where you can't see what you're doing. Because when you stick a tool of any length down inside of a pot, at any distance, but certainly in excess of a foot, and you succeed in that form, then you go to the next one and it's 14 inches deep, and then you succeed in that form, then you go one that's 16 inches deep, and you work your way up incrementally until you gain a handle on what it means to be that far off of the tool rest. And when I say shake hands with the wood, what I mean is that, in effect, you can stick that tool back in while it's spinning and back into the hole and advance it forward and stop within a quarter of an inch of the surface that you want to make that cut. Because the previous cut that you had made feels good to you, your whole body's settled into it, you extract the tool and then clean it out, and then when you go back, the tool's going to become one with your body, and you can just sense the energy in that cut approaching as the tip of the tool approaches the material. And that's when it gets exciting, because you stop the advancement and then just ease into the cut. And I remember, side comment on this, I remember as a kid in Colorado, there was a Blackfoot Indian named Charles Eagle Plume in our neighborhood, and he ran an Indian store there. And I grew up with him telling us stories. And he said that everything is energy. He wasn't a scientist. Now they're coming out saying, yes, in fact, everything is energy. But he was saying, when you gain your own energy, it means you can walk in the dark. I'm going, what? So I tried it, and I tripped over a rock once, but I got used to doing it, and I could come up to a tree, and I could talk to the tree, and I would get a response back from the sound bouncing off the tree and coming back to me. And I could get closer and closer, and that response would change. And I could reach out then and touch it and not fear bumping into it, in other words. It was a magical experience. He was also the one that told you, how do you walk at nighttime without making noise? You put your toes down first and then your heel instead of the other way.
Another question for you. I have often told people that I think that learning to hollow form freehand has actually improved my thickness control on bowls and other cuttings. Would you agree with that? Because
I definitely agree with that.
Because now I don't have to use I use my X-ray vision for imagining the thickness of a plate, for example.
David, it really was an honor talking with you, and I think I could go on for hours because I connect with the spirit I hear from you. I got to run. I have some mundane stuff to do, like fixing where I took a chimney down. So I got to run. So
Oops.
thank you.
I was doing some plumbing this morning to regain our hot water, so I understand fully what you're talking about.
Yep.
I'm going to come
Thank you,
back in.
David.
Thank you on behalf of all of us, David. This has been a delightful hour and a half. And thanks again. It was a very short notice and much appreciated. Very enjoyable.
David, are you saying that if you don't go now, you're going to be in hot water?
He's going to be in cold water.
It'll be a welcome relief, believe me. Thank you all for having me on.
Thanks, David. Enjoy.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much,
thank
David.
you.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you,
Take care.
David.
Thank you, John and Doug.
Thanks, John.
Thanks.
Thank you, David.
A lot of fun today.
Wood shop. Thank God for wood.